Long before you knew what was happening, the game had already started. Not with rage or chaos, but with the gentle pull of invisible strings. It didn't look like harm. It looked like concern, like charm, like patience too polished to be real. The words they used weren't loud, but they lingered in your head like echoes you couldn't trace. Maybe you walked away from what seemed like an ordinary moment, but something didn't sit right, like your mind had been touched without your permission. You felt it as a subtle shift inside, a kind of emotional static, and suddenly you were second-guessing your own instincts. Was I too harsh? Did I imagine that? Am I overthinking this? These aren't random thoughts. They're the fingerprints of manipulation done with surgical precision, not an explosion, but an erosion. Not an attack on your body, but a soft rewiring of your mind. It's not just psychological, it's philosophical. It blurs the line between your truth and their fiction until you're not sure who owns your thoughts anymore. And that uncertainty, that silent unraveling of your reality, is how it all begins. This isn't just a hunt for villains or a checklist to expose manipulators. It's a deeper excavation of the unseen scaffolding that holds your identity upright, the quiet fears you've normalized, the outdated beliefs you've inherited without question, the emotional longings you've buried so deep they now speak in silence. This is where manipulation finds its stage, not in the obvious, but in the overlooked. Because the most dangerous influence doesn't break down your walls, it persuades you to repaint them in someone else's colors. It doesn't scream, it whispers in a tone that sounds like reason, like love, like growth. And while you're busy being understanding, you start making small trades, your certainty for their comfort, your instincts for their approval. At first, it feels like maturity. Later, it feels like a slow disappearance. That's the quiet tragedy, realizing too late that you didn't lose yourself all at once. You gave yourself away in pieces, thinking you were doing the right thing. This isn't only psychological, it's profoundly philosophical. It's the quiet battle between the mask and the soul, between the curated version of you the world rewards and the raw, unfiltered self you've been taught to suppress in the name of peace. Emotional manipulation doesn't arrive like thunder. There's no loud destruction, no dramatic collapse. Instead, it seeps in like moisture beneath the floorboards, slowly weakening the ground you stand on without ever making a sound. It distorts the architecture of your inner world 1 inch at a time, until nothing feels quite right anymore. You wake up inside your own life and realize it no longer fits you, like wearing someone else's skin. The air feels stale, the space too small, but you keep rearranging things, trying to fix the discomfort by changing the decor. You adjust your tone, your words, your reactions, everything except the foundation itself. Because somewhere along the way, you were convinced that the cracks weren't in the structure. They were in you. And so, you stay, half comfortable, half lost, calling it home while slowly forgetting what home was ever supposed to feel like. A manipulator doesn't need to raise their voice to bend your will. Control doesn't always come in commands, it often arrives wrapped in softness, a carefully measured tone that mimics warmth or concern. They don't overpower you, they disarm you. They speak in riddles that sound like reason, in pauses that make you question yourself. Their weapons aren't visible. They use suggestion instead of force, confusion instead of clarity, and worst of all, they use your own empathy as a lever. They don't steal your strength, they convince you to donate it, piece by piece, under the illusion that you're keeping the peace or being the bigger person. You tell yourself you're just being understanding, just being kind. But kindness, when weaponized, becomes a trap. And that's where the real philosophical tragedy lies, not in the manipulator's cunning, but in how easily your compassion can be twisted into consent. The unsettling brilliance of manipulation is that it rarely looks like harm, it often dresses itself as care. It wraps its hands in velvet and calls itself love while slowly tightening the grip. It doesn't arrive with threats or demands. It arrives as guidance, concern, affection that feels just convincing enough to disarm you. Control hides behind kind eyes. Emotional coercion wears the scent of loyalty. And you, wanting peace, connection, something steady to hold onto, start to accommodate it without realizing. You tiptoe around tension, you lower your voice, you tell yourself they mean well, until one day you catch your reflection and don't recognize who you've become. That's the trap, not brutality, but the slow, poetic distortion of your reality until you're living in someone else's version of truth. It's not that you were weak. It's that you were human, wired to connect, to trust, to belong. And that very instinct was used not to uplift you, but to turn your loyalty inward like a blade. To truly grasp the mechanics of manipulation, you have to confront the raw landscape of your own mind. It's not just about spotting red flags in others, it's about recognizing the open doors inside yourself. Which parts of you were shaped by neglect, by conditional love, by the unspoken rule that your needs were too loud to be heard? What moments in your past whispered that being quiet kept you safe, that shrinking made you lovable? That's where the manipulator enters, not with force, but with precision. They don't invent your fears, they excavate them. They hold up a mirror not to show you who you are, but to reflect a distorted version that aligns with your deepest doubts. And because it echoes something familiar, you believe it. But it's not reflection, it's manipulation in disguise. A psychological sleight of hand where your wounds are turned into pathways for control. It feels like recognition, but it's really confinement, dressed up as emotional truth. From a young age, many of us were taught how to survive, not how to exist fully. We inherited invisible codes: stay small, stay agreeable, don't challenge, don't disturb the fragile calm of the room. Cry quietly. Disagree gently. Swallow your truth if it risks disrupting someone else's comfort. And so we learned that safety lived in silence, that love was given to the most adaptable version of ourselves. Over time, this conditioning didn't just shape our behavior, it rewired our instincts. So now, as adults, manipulators don't need to raise their voices or demand obedience. All they have to do is offer us the illusion of harmony, and we'll mute ourselves before they even lift a finger. We flinch at our own truth, second-guess our needs, and offer peace offerings no one asked for, just to keep things from cracking. But the cost of that performance is steep. It's the slow fading of your real voice beneath a script you never chose but memorized perfectly. Manipulation doesn't succeed because the manipulator is some all-knowing puppeteer. It succeeds because we are fundamentally human. We are born with the ache to belong, the hunger to be seen, the deep-rooted instinct to preserve connection at almost any cost. Our earliest bonds teach us how love works, even if that love came with conditions, silence, or sacrifice. So when something feels familiar, even if it hurts, we stay. Not because we're foolish, but because we're wired for hope. And that's the paradox. Hope is beautiful. It's what keeps people going through storms. But in the hands of manipulation, hope becomes the cage. It tells us to wait a little longer, to try a little harder, to be more patient, more forgiving, more understanding, even when our soul is quietly unraveling. We keep bargaining with what we feel, convincing ourselves that change is just one more compromise away. But the real question isn't whether they'll become better. It's whether your spirit can survive the waiting. With time, emotional manipulation doesn't just influence your actions, it rewrites the script inside your mind. You begin rehearsing your words before they leave your mouth, trimming the truth to make it more digestible. You apologize out of habit, not guilt, offering remorse simply to keep the peace. Your needs become carefully packaged suggestions, toned down to avoid appearing needy or selfish. You nod when you want to scream, smile when you feel hollow, agree to things your soul silently resists. Gradually, the raw, unfiltered version of you is replaced with a version that fits better into their comfort zone. Not your truth, but a tailored persona, quiet enough, agreeable enough, easy to manage. And the tragedy is, it feels like survival. But what's actually happening is far more insidious. Your identity is being whittled down, not by force, but by slow, deliberate self-editing, until the only version of you that remains is the one that won't make them uncomfortable. This is the quiet dismantling of the self, not through confrontation, but through slow, persuasive erosion. Not through domination, but through subtle invitations to shrink. You are not broken, you are reshaped. And the person who surfaces isn't a lie, but isn't complete either. It's the echo of who you were before you began editing yourself to fit into someone else's narrative. This version of you knows how to tread carefully, how to read the room before speaking, how to exist without disrupting the atmosphere. It's not a mask, but a filtered fragment, a survival identity crafted within the gravity of someone else's emotional weather. Philosophically, it's the loss of essence under the weight of adaptation. A shadow self, molded not by your truth, but by the quiet demands of a world that made your wholeness feel like too much. And yet, beneath all the layers of distortion, something untouched remains, your original self. Not shattered, not erased, but hidden beneath years of silence, swallowed instincts, and carefully measured compromises. It's still there, quietly watching, quietly waiting. Buried under fear disguised as politeness, beneath guilt worn like duty, beneath the thousand tiny moments you chose peace over truth. That self hasn't vanished, it remembers. It pulses through you like a faint rhythm you almost forgot how to hear. It says, "This is not our home. This is not who we are." And that flicker of recognition, that soft rebellion against the false reality you've been living, is the birthplace of liberation. This isn't just about emotional healing, it's a philosophical resurrection. It's the reclaiming of authorship over your being, the right to define what's real and what's worth protecting. But to reclaim it, you must name the illusions for what they are, the manipulation of guilt into moral obligation, the romanticization of pain as love, the confusion of kindness with self-sacrifice. These aren't virtues, they're beautifully wrapped cages. And freedom doesn't come from escaping them, but from finally seeing the bars for what they are. Your mind becomes a quiet war zone, no explosions, just a constant hum of contradiction beneath the surface. You feel it first as unease, a subtle tightening in your chest, a tension that logic can't quite explain. One part of you is screaming that something is off, that you need to pull away, reclaim space, breathe. But then comes the second voice, the voice trained to doubt, to rationalize, to protect the image of the other person at the cost of your own clarity. This isn't weakness. This is what happens when your internal compass is no longer pointing north, but bending to the weight of someone else's influence. You're no longer navigating from your truth, you're following a map drawn by another's agenda. And this philosophical split, is what we call dissonance. Two opposing realities held in the same fragile psyche, they love me, and they harm me. And because both feel true, your mind scrambles to make them coexist, even if it means silencing the voice that's trying to save you. But here's the thing, truth doesn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes, it's a whisper, a single, quiet realization that doesn't need to be loud to be life-changing. One honest moment of recognition can undo years of noise. One clear thought can begin the slow, steady process of waking up. The deepest wound left by manipulation isn't the fractured relationship, it's the collapse of self-trust. That quiet, devastating moment when you no longer believe your own eyes, your own feelings, your own voice. You start to question your memories as if they're myths. You hesitate before speaking, waiting for unspoken approval. You scan the room for cues before allowing yourself to feel anything at all. Existing becomes an act of negotiation. And slowly, without noticing, you begin to ask for permission to be yourself. That's the real theft. But the turning point comes the moment you whisper a different question, what if I'm not wrong? That one spark of doubt in the narrative they fed you is the start of your return. Philosophy reminds us, identity is not a statue carved in stone. It's a river, constantly reshaping itself through time, thought, and experience. So when manipulation tells you that you're unstable or broken, the answer isn't to plead for validation. It's to strip away the noise and remember your essence. To ask not who they say you are, but who you were before you began bending to fit inside someone else's version of reality. Realizing you've been manipulated feels less like a dramatic epiphany and more like slowly noticing that the room you've been living in has no windows. At first, you squint, disoriented, not because the light is blinding, but because you've spent so long calling the dimness normal. You don't yet know the way out, but something shifts, You stop confusing survival with peace. You're no longer absorbing their version of reality like gospel. You start watching, questioning, and in that stillness, in that quiet mental shift from participant to observer, freedom begins to take root. You don't build barricades, you build clarity. You no longer decorate the prison, you begin sketching the map to the door. You ground yourself in what's real, what your body felt, what your eyes saw, what your gut whispered. You document. You reach out, not to the person who spun the web, but to someone untouched by the tangle. And most importantly, you stop asking for truth from the very source of distortion. That choice, to seek truth outside of chaos, is not just healing. It is philosophical rebellion. It is reclaiming authorship over your own reality. And perhaps the most overlooked wisdom, the one that often gets drowned out by doubt, is the voice of your body. Long before your thoughts can name what's wrong, your nervous system is already screaming in whispers. That sudden tightness in your chest when they walk into the room. The invisible weight in your stomach after a conversation laced with concern. The exhaustion that follows being near someone who says all the right things but leaves your spirit in pieces. These aren't overreactions. They are early warning systems, your body translating the truth before your mind dares to admit it. Listen. Don't dismiss the ache. Don't rationalize the discomfort. Because to return to yourself, you don't just need awareness, you need voice. Speak, even if your words tremble. Say no without dressing it up. Say stop without apologizing. Say this doesn't feel right, and let that truth hang in the air like a declaration. Philosophically, this is the return to logos, not just language, but the power of speech to carve reality, to reframe your world from silence to sovereignty. When you reclaim your words, you don't just defend your boundaries, you reconstruct your identity. One sentence at a time. At some point, it hits you, not all at once, but like fragments falling into place. That what you once mistook for love was really surveillance disguised as concern. That what you called compromise was actually self-erasure dressed in diplomacy. And the so-called peace you clung to, it was just the muffled stillness that followed your own silencing. But then something shifts, you remember. Real peace isn't the absence of noise. It's the presence of truth that doesn't tremble. It's not walking on eggshells, it's walking in your own rhythm. Healing from manipulation isn't just about patching emotional bruises, it's metaphysical. It's about peeling away the scaffolding of false narratives and rebuilding a home from the foundation of your essence. Not a borrowed space decorated with someone else's preferences, but a dwelling shaped by your own hands. You begin to furnish it with your beliefs, paint it with your boundaries, and illuminate it with clarity that doesn't need permission to shine. And in that sacred stillness, the kind that soothes rather than suppresses, you finally exhale. Not because you're safe from others, but because you've returned to a self that no longer needs to hide. Your identity isn't a riddle for someone else to decode, nor a blueprint waiting for outside approval. It's a living, breathing narrative, unfinished, evolving, and entirely yours to shape. You are not a character in someone else's plotline. You are the writer, the narrator, and the witness of your own becoming. And no manipulator, no childhood scar, no echo from a past wound deserves to punctuate your story unless you willingly surrender the pen. You've always had a voice, not just to speak, but to define, to draw borders around your truth. And now, after being silenced by distortion, you're remembering how to trust that voice, not because it's perfect, but because it's yours. This isn't merely defense, it's philosophical reclamation. The act of self-inquiry, the courage to hold the mirror steady, the sacred discipline of returning to yourself. This is the philosophy of liberation, not in theory, but in movement, in choice, in voice.